Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now this last Sunday we asked the question, why does God allow us to suffer? And we came to the conclusion that our faith is more valuable than our comfort. And that's a key theological principle that's going to help us to understand Scripture and God so much better. But let's change gears for a minute. I want to ask you the question, have you ever had to fill someone else's shoes? You know, it almost never works out, does it? You know, you can never quite live up to their legacy. I remember becoming a full-time youth pastor at the church where I grew up in. And I had to fill the shoes of so many great men that had come before me. And I'm going to be honest, it was awful. I want to start out with this question. Whose shoes would you dread trying to fill? And why? If you lived in Israel during Jesus' day, the last person that you would want to have to fill their shoes would be Moses. Because he was the person who God used to free the Israelites from Egyptian slavery 1,600 years before Jesus. I mean, everybody looked up to Moses. I want you to think about all of the miracles that Moses did. The plagues over Egypt, parting the Red Sea, miraculously providing water and manna for the nation for 40 years in the desert. Who could possibly live up to the legacy of Moses? But what I want you to see is that Jesus didn't fill Moses' shoes. No, it was the other way around. Moses was actually trying to fill Jesus' shoes. Moses was a man who pointed 1,600 years into the future, and he was an imperfect glimpse at who Jesus would be. So let's read the context of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 families. It starts with the brutal death of Jesus' dear friend, John the Baptist. So start out by reading Matthew chapter 14, verses 3 through 14. Why did Herod and Herodias want John the Baptist dead? Why do you think Jesus needed to withdraw to a solitary place? And do you think he wanted to deal with the crowds when the boat landed? And why did both Jesus and Moses choose to help the people that God placed in their lives? When I read these passages, I see Jesus hurting and needing some space from the people. But yet, he puts the needs of others before his own. So what's the difference between feeling compassion and being compassionate? And what are some of the reasons we might refuse to be compassionate with others? Are any of these things justified? Why or why not? In the next few passages, Jesus continues to show compassion for the people. Read Matthew chapter 14, verses 15 through 18. What were the reasons the disciples felt that they couldn't do anything to help? What were all the reasons that they stated? And do you ever feel so overwhelmed by the needs of others that you feel helpless to do anything? What are some of the reasons we give for not helping others? So the disciples said, well, this place is a wilderness and we have no resources to be able to meet their needs. It was already late, and of course everyone needed to eat before going to bed. And finally, the crowd needed to be sent away to the surrounding villages so that they could buy food for themselves. Those are the reasons why the disciples couldn't help. What are some of our reasons? The problem's too big. I have enough problems of my own that I'm dealing with. They need to solve their own problems. If I continue to solve their problems for them, then they're never going to leave me alone. Next, I want you to read Matthew chapter 14, verses 19 through 21. How does the story of God providing manna from heaven through Moses point to Jesus? And how is Jesus better than Moses in this story? Thinking about those passages, why did Jesus make the disciples uncomfortable before providing the miracle? Why didn't he just do the miracle to begin with? Why the whole song and dance with his disciples? And how does this story speak to you when it comes to meeting a need that is bigger than you? I want you to close the small group by telling a story of how God used the faith of someone else to speak to you. And wouldn't it be great if someone else told a story about you someday? Somebody else was sitting in a small group and said, man, because of the faith of you, God spoke to them. Close in prayer and ask God to give us the kind of faith that inspires other people to follow Jesus. And that is why our faith is more valuable than our comfort.